What if I told you that a 16-year-old boy once stood in front of a crew of grown men twice his age on a frozen patch of Alaskan dirt and told them he was now in charge? No college degree, no business plan, just a shovel, a stubborn streak, and a family name that meant something in the gold fields. That boy grew into one of the most successful placer gold miners alive today, and the story of how he got there is stranger, harder, and more dramatic than anything you could invent. His name is Parker Schnabel, and this is the real story of how a kid from Haines, Alaska turned dirt into millions, one brutal season at a time. If you love raw, real gold mining stories that don't need exaggeration to be incredible, stay with me until the end, and consider subscribing so you never miss the next one. Parker Schnabel was born in Haines, Alaska, a small town wedged between glaciers and wilderness, in a family where mining wasn't a hobby or a dream, it was simply the family business. His grandfather, John Schnabel, was already a legend in Alaskan mining circles long before cameras ever showed up. John had founded the Big Nugget mine near Porcupine Creek. It was on that ground that young Parker spent nearly every summer of his childhood. While other kids were learning to ride bikes, Parker was learning to operate heavy equipment. By the time he was 5 years old, he was already riding along on mining runs with his grandfather, soaking in lessons that most people never learn in a lifetime. There was no fairy tale about it. It was cold, physical, unforgiving work, and Parker was in the middle of it from almost the moment he could walk. What makes his story different from so many others is what happened when he turned 16. Most teenagers at that age are worrying about school dances and driver's licenses. Parker was handed the reins of an entire mining operation by his grandfather and told, essentially, to prove himself. Imagine being 16 years old and responsible for a payroll for heavy machinery worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and for a crew of hardened miners who had been working the ground since before you were born. Many of those men had no reason to respect a teenager giving them orders. Parker had to earn that respect the only way possible in the mining world, by outworking everyone else, by making smart decisions under pressure, and by never asking anyone to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. It would have been easy for that operation to fall apart under a leader that young. Instead, it became the foundation of everything that came after. By the time Parker was 18, something in him wanted more than what the Big Nugget mine alone could offer. He made a decision that shocked a lot of people around him. Instead of using the money he had saved for college, he poured it into a mining claim of his own in the Klondike region of Canada's Yukon. He leased ground from Tony Beets, another legendary figure in the gold mining world, and set out to build something that belonged entirely to him. That first rookie season in the Klondike could have ended his mining ambitions before they truly began. Instead, Parker and his small crew pulled 1,029 ounces of gold out of that ground, worth roughly $1.4 million at the time. For an 18-year-old running his very first independent operation, it was a staggering result, and it proved something important. This wasn't beginner's luck built on his grandfather's reputation. This was a young miner who genuinely understood the ground, the equipment, and the brutal math of turning dirt into gold. From that first season forward, Parker's operation only grew larger and more ambitious. Season after season, he pushed his crew and his equipment harder, moving more ground, processing more material, and chasing pay streaks that most experienced miners would have considered too risky. By the time he was 24 years old, his career total had already crossed $13 million in gold recovered from ground. That number alone would be remarkable for a miner twice his age with decades of experience. For a young man barely out of his teens, it placed him in a category almost entirely his own. But Parker never treated any single season as proof that he had figured everything out. Gold mining has a way of humbling people who get too comfortable, and he understood that better than most. One of the most defining traits of Parker's career has been his refusal to stay in one place, both literally and in terms of ambition. As his Klondike operation matured, he didn't simply settle into a comfortable routine of running the same ground the same way every year. He began looking outward, studying other mining traditions, other techniques, and other parts of the world where gold might still be waiting for someone willing to take a risk. This restlessness led him thousands of miles from home, to places most placer miners never consider. He traveled to Guyana in South America and to Papua New Guinea, chasing leads and testing his skills against completely unfamiliar terrain, climate, and mining culture. These weren't easy, glamorous trips. They involved dense jungle, unpredictable logistics, and the very real possibility of coming home with nothing to show for the time and money invested. Perhaps the most transformative of these outside adventures came when Parker traveled to Australia and New Zealand, searching for record-sized nuggets and studying mining techniques that were completely different from anything he had grown up with in Alaska and the Yukon. In New Zealand specifically, Parker became fascinated with a mining approach used by local miners, something often referred to as the Kiwi wash plant style. Rather than simply admiring the technique from a distance, Parker did what he has always done. He absorbed it, adapted it, and decided to build something of his own inspired by what he had learned. Working alongside a gold recovery engineer from British Columbia, he helped design and construct his own wash plant, blending Alaskan grit with a technique he had picked up on the other side of the world. That willingness to travel, learn, and rebuild his own operation based on new ideas is a big part of why his results kept improving year after year, while other operations plateaued. Back home, the numbers kept climbing in ways that turned heads across the entire mining industry. During one particularly strong stretch, Parker and his crew hauled in $24 million in a single season alone. Not a career total, a single season. To put that in perspective, many placer mining operations around the world would consider a fraction of that amount over several years to be a wildly successful run. Parker was pulling numbers like that from ground that he and his team had scouted, tested, and committed to, often against the advice of more cautious voices around him. There was also a season following a major run in the Yukon where Parker turned around and reinvested nearly $200,000 of his own gold into testing new ground back in his home state of Alaska, near Fairbanks. He suspected there was serious profit sitting beneath that soil, but the clay-heavy composition of the ground meant he would need entirely different equipment to process it efficiently. Rather than walk away from the challenge, he treated it as another puzzle to solve, another example of the pattern that has defined his entire career. Identify the obstacle, invest in the right tools, and grind until the ground gives up its answer. What's remarkable is that none of this success has come without real setbacks along the way. Mining, especially placer gold mining in extreme environments like Alaska and the Yukon, is not a business where confidence alone guarantees results. There have been seasons where Parker's crews faced equipment failures at the worst possible moments, frozen ground that fought back against even the largest excavators, and stretches of testing where the numbers simply didn't match the optimism going into the season. In more recent years, Parker has openly acknowledged facing setback after setback during difficult seasons, moments where the easy path would have been to scale back, play it safe, and protect what he had already built. Instead, time and again, he has chosen to push further, dig deeper, and bet on his own judgment, even when the outcome was far from guaranteed. It's worth pausing here to talk about who Parker Schnabel actually is away from the machinery and the mining claims, because it says a lot about why his story has resonated with so many people. Despite building a fortune that most people can barely imagine, by his own admission, he has not spent it the way many might expect. There's no gold-plated sports car sitting in a garage, no oversized mansion built purely to show off success. Instead, Parker has spoken about the values instilled in him by a family that quite literally carved a life out of Alaskan wilderness from scratch. His great-grandfather first arrived in Alaska generations ago. His grandmother joined him in the late 1930s, and his own father, even well into his 60s, has continued waking up before dawn to put in a full day of work. That kind of generational work ethic doesn't disappear just because a bank account grows larger. If anything, according to Parker himself, it becomes the standard he holds himself to every single season. One of the more quietly emotional parts of Parker's story involves his grandfather, John Schnabel, the man who started it all at the Big Nugget Mine. Parker has talked about spending a summer at the mine site with his grandfather, where the two of them would sit down together every single night. His grandfather had an extraordinary memory for the history of the region, for the mining stories that stretched back decades, and for lessons about patience and persistence that can't be taught in any classroom. It's one of Parker's biggest regrets that those nightly conversations were never recorded for the future. Here is a young man who has more financial security than almost anyone his age could hope for, and the thing he wishes he could get back isn't money at all. It's time and memory and the voice of a grandfather who helped shape everything he would eventually become. As his career has progressed, Parker has also become something of a mentor and a magnet for other ambitious young miners looking to break into an industry that can be brutally difficult to enter without existing family connections or serious capital. His operation has grown into one of the largest and most respected placer gold mining companies operating across multiple claims in the Yukon's Klondike region, including a significant royalty agreement tied to a historic mining district that has produced over 20 million ounces of gold since it was first discovered generations ago. Being trusted with a stake in ground with that kind of historical significance is not something handed out casually within the mining community. It reflects years of built credibility, technical skill, and a reputation for doing things the right way, even under pressure to cut corners. Season after season, the pattern in Parker's career has remained remarkably consistent, even as the specific numbers and locations have changed. He identifies ground that others might overlook or consider too risky. He commits real capital and real risk to testing that ground properly, rather than relying on guesswork or wishful thinking. When the results are promising, he scales up aggressively, bringing in bigger equipment and expanding his crew to take full advantage of the opportunity. And critically, when the results fall short, he has shown a willingness to adjust, to learn from the failure, and to apply those lessons to the next stretch of ground rather than repeating the same mistakes out of stubbornness. That combination of aggression and adaptability is rare in any industry, but it's especially rare in an industry as unforgiving as placer gold mining, where a single wrong decision about where to dig can cost an entire season's profit in a matter of weeks. It's also worth noting how much the technical side of Parker's operation has evolved over the years. In the earliest seasons, success largely came down to hard-earned intuition passed down from his grandfather and years of hands-on experience reading the ground. As his operation has grown, Parker has increasingly incorporated more advanced methods into his decision-making, studying geological patterns more closely, adapting equipment designs learned from international mining traditions, and constantly experimenting with ways to improve recovery rates at the wash plant. This evolution reflects a broader shift happening across the entire placer mining industry, where old-school grit is increasingly paired with more sophisticated planning and technology. Miners who resist that evolution often find themselves falling behind, while those willing to adapt, like Parker, tend to keep finding new ways to succeed, even as easily accessible ground becomes harder to find. Looking at the full arc of his career so far, from a 5-year-old riding along at the Big Nugget mine, to a 16-year-old suddenly running an entire operation, to an 18-year-old betting his college fund on a claim of his own, to a young man crossing oceans to learn new techniques in Australia and New Zealand, to eventually building one of the most respected placer operations in the Yukon, it becomes clear that Parker Schnabel's success was never the result of a single lucky discovery. It has been built season after season, risk after risk, setback after setback, through decisions that could have just as easily gone the other way. That is, in many ways, a far more compelling story than any single headline-grabbing find could ever be, because it shows what real, sustained success in a brutal industry actually looks like over time. There is also something worth reflecting on in how Parker talks about the future of his own industry. He has expressed genuine belief that the next generation of successful miners will be those who combine traditional grit with modern tools, geological understanding, and a willingness to travel and learn from mining traditions outside their home region. In many ways, his own career has already become a blueprint for that philosophy, whether or not he intended it that way. Young miners entering the industry today study his path not because of a single dramatic discovery, but because of the consistency, the discipline, and the calculated risk-taking that has defined nearly 2 decades of his working life. There's another side to this story that rarely gets discussed in the flashy highlight reels, and that is the sheer physical and mental toll that a mining season like this takes on everyone involved, not just Parker himself. Alaska and the Yukon do not offer forgiving working conditions. The mining season is short, often compressed into just a few months before the ground freezes solid and the equipment becomes useless. That means every single day matters. There's no room for a slow start or a lazy stretch in the middle of the summer, because the window to recover gold before winter shuts everything down is brutally narrow. Crews often work long shifts, sometimes stretching into what feels like around-the-clock operations, running excavators, loaders, and wash plants for as many hours as daylight and machinery will allow. Mechanics are kept on constant standby, because a single breakdown at the wrong moment can cost days of production that simply cannot be recovered later in the season. Parker has built his reputation partly on how he responds in these moments of pressure, refusing to let a mechanical failure or a disappointing test result derail the entire operation, and instead treating every setback as a problem to be solved rather than a reason to give up.